Go ahead.
We're on. Good morning, people. I'm James Long, and today I will be talking about regulations, ownership, and organisations involved with TV and film production in Ireland. And I'll be examining in particular the public and private sector, comparing and contrasting. So the contents are such. I'll have a brief overview of broadcasting and regulation bodies, commissioning bodies, the ownership of media in our country, and then I'll get into specifics related to the public and private sector, and it'll be involving RT and TV3. And there's all the issues involved in terms of employee rights and employer as well. So right, we'll get into regulation and regulation bodies. There's the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, and they were set up by the Department of Communications, and they are involved in drawing up the rules and codes for television and radio broadcasts in Ireland. It's also licensing, and also they work in tandem with RTE and the state. And they also are involved in funding, but it has sort of linked to Irish culture and heritage. Now, Comreg are responsible for the regulation of electronic communication in general, and they try and foster and encourage growth while protecting the consumer. That's the mantra or whatever. And they work within EU and Irish legislation. And then IFCO are involved in film, they're the censor board. And I found it interesting that if you give them a film to grade, you have to pay them. I just thought that was interesting. And there's various commissioning bodies in Ireland. I've drawn attention to a few of them there, and they all have different remits and criteria and agendas when making decisions regarding funding. Now, ownership of media in Ireland. Dennis O'Brien, Independent News and Media is his company. Now, they're mainly in radio and print, and I was reading an article there that they've taken over Celtic media as well. So the tentacles are ever expanded in Ireland. And there was an article, Andy Kenny, and actually this is actually relates to Virgin Media as well, which is taken over by, or TV3 was taken over by Virgin Media, which is Liberty Global and Ireland Liberty Global. That's Andy Kenny. People are concerned that there's only a few people who are in control of all of our broadcasting stations and all our media, and he is not relenting to public pressure to carry out a bit of research on the whole and investigate it. He's not concerned. So anyway, an RT is a publicly owned and it's controlled by the Minister of Communications, Climate Action and Environment, Dennis Norton. Union recognition in Ireland there's three that I found: SIP2, TEU, Irish Equity. That's for actors. Now, in the private sector, TV3, they're under no obligation to deal with unions. They don't even have to recognise them. Whereas RT are obliged to deal with unions, and they'll usually be the ones negotiating on your behalf. Gradual rate of pay, contract, pension. Now, pay, whether it's public or private, they have to comply with the following: minimum wage of $9.15 per hour, rest period of 11 hours for every 24-hour work period. 24 hours of rest for every 7 days worked, not to exceed 48 hours in a 7-day working week, half-hour break for every 6 hours worked. And then, yeah, like I said before, rate of pay is negotiated more often than not by the union, and private is contractual, so that there's a transparency when you're state, when you're public, and that doesn't happen with private. So standards of, in the public standards of work, there's many incentives to go that way, like there's childcare, they protect you with your salary, there's a pension scheme. Essentially there's job security, whereas with private thing, it's less secure, but it's flexible. And your salary is dependent on your performance, not on how long you've worked with them. Pension, RT is a pension scheme for employees under the Public Pension Act 2012. TV3, you have to get your own. They have no obligation to provide you with one. Holiday and sick pay, private, it's entirely dependent on employer and your contract. But I find this interesting, like, you know, this goes across the board that it's up to the employer. But if you give them a little perks, it encourages morale. But it's entirely down to the employer. But I think that's important to emphasise. And in public, under the Working Time Act 1997, covers holiday pay. And it's holiday pay full-time, 4 weeks per year, part-timers, pro rata basis depending on hours worked. Now, sick pay, they're not entitled to cover it, but the employer has to tell its employees straight away what the story is concerning it, if you're entitled or not. But beyond that, you can actually go to the state and look for illness benefit if you've worked for a certain, I think it's 104 weeks. So you've made your contributions, you paid. And maternity paternity applies to both public and private. Women entitled to 26 weeks paid and 60 unpaid may depend on contract. And paternity 2 weeks paid leave, but you must notify employer 4 weeks in advance. Health and safety regulations, both must adhere to and follow regulations set out by the Health and Safety Authority, HSA, and that's the Safety, Health and Welfare Act 2005. And this was interesting, standard of production, like everyone says that TV3 have more of a budget, but when I was looking at, when I was researching it, like salaries of hosts and actors on RT is far greater than TV3. The other thing about RT is, okay, the budget might be smaller because they have to meet a certain criteria. They have to certain criteria, and they have to meet the demands of all the demographics in society. But on a whole, I think because they generate their money from license fees as well as advertisements, they are restricted, but they're not as flashy as TV3. They're TV3, because they're always under commercial pressure for viewer figures. They like to throw out the maybe a little bit more glossy and flashy, a bit trashier, whereas RT would be more staid, and that's my own opinion on the whole thing. But I think that's me done. I think that's the end of the slides, yeah. Okay.